This is an opportunity for everybody in the room to be able to learn and apply the basic key business fundamentals. And we'll talk about his first book, but the second book I think is just as great and just as important about how we can all influence our outcomes, not just getting across the first wave, but also the second wave, because they're both incredibly important. So tell us your story. Start from the beginning. Why'd you write this? How'd you come about this concept, and why is it so relevant today?
Right. But I like to write because my first career was as an English professor, and we decided to move back to the Bay Area, and there were no jobs in academics. So I joined a software company, and for 10 years I spent in roles of sales and marketing. And I led sales, but I never actually made quota, which is a bad quality in a salesperson. But it turns out to be an okay quality in a marketing person. And so marketing was actually where I ended up. And I joined McKenna in 1986, and that was kind of the turning point for my world, because at that point I thought this is exactly what I like to do and know how to do. And Regis at that time was advising the premier tech companies around the world. He really did kind of invent high-tech marketing for my generation. And we began to see a phenomenon, though, early on, these incredible high-flying companies, great launches, next big Apple, next big Intel, and then they'd sort of kind of go off the radar. And it's like, well, so what happened? What happened? You had Walmart as a client, you had Citigroup as a client. They say, yeah, we still have Walmart as a client, we still have Citigroup as a client, we just don't have any other clients, right? And so we were trying to figure out what was going on. And that led to this notion of crossing the chasm, which is that there was a chasm. Regis had taught us that there was a technology adoption life cycle, but it was presented as kind of one continuous motion. You went from the early adopters to the early majority to the late majority. And all this was just saying was, look, there's the transition from the early adopters to the early majority. It's not natural. It's actually unnatural. And so that's where the ideas came from. And then that led to a practice around crossing the chasm. And then in 1991, I thought, well, maybe I should start my own firm, but I wasn't sure. And I was at one of these kind of sessions, and I'm Geoff Moore, hi, blah, blah, blah. He said, oh, you're the Chasm guy. I thought, the Chasm guy. So that's when the Chasm group started, yeah.
Well, I'm glad I moved from CMO to COO.
Yeah.
So we've all, in this room, we've seen that adoption life cycle of Crossing the Chasm. Hopefully everybody in this room has read that book. But can you just first define the adoption stages and what's important?
And by the way, a lot of people in this room may not have read the book because it was generational. There was a time when it was, clear, and then it was like, well, that book's too old to actually read anymore. But it's come back, and so the key thing with the technology adoption life cycle, this is important for everybody dealing with disruptive technology. When you introduce a disruptive innovation into any community, it will self-segregate into various adoption sub-communities. And you have to take them on in order, and you have to know where you are in that sequence, because the playbook for each community is different from, in fact, incompatible with the prior playbook. So the 4 playbooks are the early market playbook. The early market, you're in the early market when your customers believe what you believe. So when they believe what you believe, they buy into you, they get excited about you. All the early startups that Regis had trouble, they had wonderful success in the early market. People loved them. Fortune magazine wanted to write about them. It was really great. Big projects, flagship, amazing results. The next group wants no part of that. So it's like that is early adopters, that's not me. I'm a pragmatist. And the pragmatists say, I'm going to do this when I see other people doing it and not before. And so you have this sort of junior high dance problem, right? How do I get the dance started? And so it turned out that second group, where we ended up calling them pragmatists in pain, they were pragmatists who were saddled with a problem they couldn't solve with their current solution sets. So they did not say, we believe what you believe, because they didn't. They said, but we need what you have. But in order to play that playbook, you have to give them 100% of the solution to their problem. Even though your product is maybe only 80%, you have to figure out a way to get them 100%. And that commitment is what a startup can afford to do, but a large company cannot afford to do. So a large company, if their partners will do it for them, it'll work. But as a startup, when you cross the chasm, that first beachhead market, you have to, so it's a very niche market, vertically integrated, we're going to do it whatever it takes. We're going to make this one group of pragmatists successful, because that's what gets the pragmatist dance started. And then that becomes contagious, and you can get another group of pragmatists because they say, oh, well, those guys have done it. Okay, so with pagers, doctors did it, so drug dealers felt comfortable doing it. You know, I mean, but the point is, you get these niche markets going. That gets to a certain size. If you want to get to 100 million, 200 million, arguably 500 million, you can do it just niche by niche. But at some point, tech markets go to a third stage where people say, hang on. This isn't just DocuSign. This isn't just for real estate agents. This is for everybody. And so all of a sudden we called it the tornado. And that's when people say, they don't say we believe what you believe. It's beyond that. They don't even say we need what you have. They say we want what they have. I want an iPhone. I want Wi-Fi in my restaurant. I want that. And that's when markets take off. And that's when high-tech stocks go through the roof. Because all of a sudden there's this amazing amount of demand comes into the economy all at once. It's a whole new money bucket. And if you're at that first mover advantage and you're the leader of that market, that's when these fortunes are created. And so that, we call that the tornado getting sucked up inside the tornado. And then at some point, that begins to level out. You get enough Wi-Fi everywhere. Everybody does have a mobile phone. Apple's going through it right now. Everybody does have they have three of them, right? And at some point you realize, okay, now we're on a fourth stage called Main Street. And Main Street is, hey, we're going to be buying and consuming this stuff for the next 15 years, but not in big honking chunks. And by the way, we'd really prefer to get it as a service. And we'd like to subscribe to it, or we'd like to actually outsource it or whatever. So my point is, if you look at those, and those people say, it's not that we believe what you believe, not even that we need what you have, and even with the late adopters, I'm not even sure I want what they have, but my children have told me I need what they have. So my children want to text me. Okay, I guess I have, what's texting, right? What is Instagram? They told me I had to be on Instagram. So the point is, each of those groups needs a different playbook. And what was happening at Regis was our companies nailed the first playbook, did not implement the second playbook, and they could never get the fire started in the mainstream market. So that was the problem statement.
And to bring it home, who do you think has really deliberately executed crossing the chasm well? And then we'll go into some companies maybe that didn't, to bring it home.
Right, and by the way, this is the third edition because I gave lots of examples in the first edition that you've never heard of. That was in 1990. Then in 1999, I thought, well, I got to rewrite it because nobody's heard of those companies. I put a same book, exactly the same book, all new examples. You don't know any of those. Actually, you do know those companies, but only because they're defunct, right? And so in 2013, 2013, I can't remember what it was. I thought, okay, one more time, hopefully last time. In that one I included Splunk, I included Salesforce, Akamai, VMware. So let me just talk a little bit about those. So Splunk's an example of a company that, basically it's mega data. How do you manage streaming log files and correlate and extract insights from them? Their crossing the chasm use case was cybersecurity. So in cybersecurity, you have an incredibly urgent problem where you have to correlate data from massively different places. The only thing they have in common is a timestamp. And so just how to make that work. And so Splunk, they still get like 45% of the revenue from cybersecurity because you couldn't play the game without the Splunk deal. But they could have been anything. They were just a sort of unstructured database. I was on the board of Akamai. So Akamai came out in the bubble. Their entire .com install base went to zero. And they were basically bankrupt, except they'd raised about $400 million. It helps to do that before a bubble pops. But what they did is they ended up going, they had content delivery network. They went to the media people. And basically the media people were using the internet to deliver media internationally, nationally, and all these models, and they couldn't get, they just had lots of jitter, lots of defects, whatever. And Akamai had a worldwide caching solution that they put in service to the media industry, which it was not its number one application, but that was the one that they committed to. And then VMware was a third one. When VMware first came out, it was like, well, you could run Windows and Linux on your laptop.
Well, that's exciting, for about 7 people. But those 7 were very excited. But it crossed the chasm when IT people said, we need to test our in-house applications. We're having to provision very large amounts of computers to do that, and then we have to deprovision them. And then we have to provision them again and deprovision them. And what VMware said, no, you don't. No, you don't. You can put it into the VMware operating system. We can bring it up virtually. We can bring it down virtually. Now, that was not what made them famous. What made them famous was, as you well know, they created a horizontal computing factory across all our computers. But the DevOps test, well, it wasn't DevOps then. It was just dev test at the time. That was their crossing the chasm. So in each case, what they did, those companies did is they said, even though this is a relatively small market, this is our group for this is like winning the New Hampshire primary. By the way, there's like 20 people running for that thing, right? But because if you win the New Hampshire primary, now you have the right to go to the next primary and the next primary. But you got to win the first primary. So and each one of those companies realized that, and they made that extra. They went the extra mile for that second group, right? Not the early adopters, but those early pragmatists, and did that.
Who didn't make it?
Oy. So I listed 3 because I know them all. Anybody know what a Segway is? Okay, the Segway actually lives at the bottom of a chasm, and it's just wandering back and forth at the bottom of a chasm. But this was, remember, this was going to be the great big thing.
Aren't they back though?
No.
Well,
there's a mall cops occasionally. You see one wandering back and forth. But that's what, by the way, when you go into the chasm, the worst thing that can happen to you is not to die, because you're now a zombie. You wander. You can't go out of business. You can't grow. You just sort of wander back and forth, and people go, "Oh, that's a Segway." Okay. I, on the other hand, helped the pen-based computing market take off. Right? I was working with Momenta. Jerry Kaplan had Go. Richard Schaefer turned his whole technology newsletter, devoted entirely to pen computing. And so you say, well, why didn't pen computing take off? The early adopters thought it was really, really, really cool, but there was no compelling use case on the other side of the chasm. There was nobody that said, I can't solve a problem without pen computing. And so it just kept on, would run up to the chasm and wave and run back and run up the chasm, look, no, okay. And it never got through the chasm. And so those companies don't exist. And then, I wrote down this one, but so has anybody read Bad Blood? Theranos? Yeah, okay. So you look at Theranos, and Theranos is now the story of Elizabeth, and it's the story of lying, cheating, and whatever else. But look at it from a chasm crossing problem. If they had, and I don't really know how good their technology was, but if we assume that they had some real technology, what they should have done is, instead of done what they did and said, we can do this for anybody under any blood test, they should have said, what is the blood test that you really, really, really cannot afford to take a full sample from? How do we nail that blood test? How do we make sure we get those indicators and get across the chasm with that use case and then expand? But of course, that was not the play that they did.
No. Those are good points. So you actually wrote this in 1991, so we're actually sharing the date of it. Okay. The interesting thing is you didn't just write the book and then take a whole bunch of years off. You've been spending time with companies ever since, knee deep into that research. What has changed? You wrote the 3rd edition. What has changed in that time frame, and what has stayed the same?
Yeah, that's good. I think that the biggest change by far was the rise of the B2C media world. For those of us, I see some friendly faces in the crowd myself, for those of us who had a significant career in the 90s, it was not conceivable that consumer could lead a high-tech market. The way high-tech markets worked is they started in the enterprise, you cost reduced it, and eventually you could get to something that a consumer could use. So when the tech bubble popped, in 2001, a lot of people in venture said, well, computing's dead. We're going to go into clean tech, we're going to go into biotech, we're going to go into anything but tech. And consumer computing came out of nowhere. And for the traditional investor and the traditional executive community, it was just a complete blindside. Everything that Google said sounded so wrong. They were going to keep every log file of every click on the computer forever. It's like that was the dumbest thing you ever heard. You couldn't possibly afford to do that. HP wouldn't let. Then, you're going to reinvent the entire data center. Oh, I see. You're going to reinvent disk drives, and everything they said. You thought that is so stupid, which is why they're rich and I'm not. But the point was, it was a complete blindside. And then the media model, and all of a sudden we're going to give away software because we're going to monetize it through advertising. I mean, everything about that whole phenomenon was just a complete shock. And so when you try to apply crossing the chasm to those business models, it doesn't work. It's not fit for purpose. The crossing the chasm is a B2B model, and I didn't know that until after the B2C came along. But and now this decade, it's the B2B part of the model for this decade is a B2B2C model, where the first company helps the second company deal digitally with their large audiences. So the B2B part of that thing is the crossing the chasm place. And to answer the other part of your question, Scott, that hasn't changed at all. Literally, the framework from 1991 to the present, those 4 playbooks, they were visible in 1991. We articulated them in that for the next few years. Those playbooks have not changed in 25 years. So maybe it's because the human race is not very, I don't know, but they haven't changed. It was so interesting. It's like consumers started inside the tornado. Basically, they skipped the first 2 playbooks. Now, how is that possible? The only way that's possible is if you take all of the risk out of the buying and adoption decision. So the whole freemium model, which would never occur to anybody in B2B ever, became, this whole idea. I remember when somebody said, well, you know what URL really stands for? Ubiquity now, revenue later. And that was the model. And so under that model, there was this massive amount of adoption. But I was moderating a panel at Davos, and Nicholas, I forget his last name, the guy who founded Skype, Hedstrom, I think, whatever, Nicholas, is on one side of me, and Bill Gates is on the other side. And we're at this big panel, and I'm asking Nicholas about his business model, and he says, well, we have, I don't know, X million customers. And Gates leans forward and says, what do you define a customer to be? Are they paying you anything? And Bill was outraged that he was even claiming that he had anything like a business. And the truth was, most of the audience was on Bill's side. We didn't understand it was unpaid circulation in a media model. And the media model and the fact that consumer electronics and digital fabric made media possible was, as soon as you saw it, in retrospect, you thought, well, duh. But I have to tell you, if you came at it from the history, at least that I came at it with, that was hard to get. This is the decade when the enterprise is trying to absorb the digital communication fabric that they did not pay for. So the enterprise did not create cloud computing, and the enterprise did not create mobile computing. And basically, but the world adopted both. So this is the decade where most of the technical companies in this room are trying to take a consumer-oriented communication infrastructure and lay it on top of an auditable, hyper-secure system of record. So the system of engagement and the system of record. And what we're discovering is those two were never designed to go together. They don't fit well together. And the attack surface for cyber vulnerability has just exploded astronomically, which is why security companies are going to pop up for the foreseeable future, as long as I can tell, because that architecture is so porous, and there's so much resources in our computer databases now. It's like, So by the way, those are pragmatists in pain. You want any early adopting, in fact, if I were doing a security product, I'd start there because they hurt so much. So this is back to this issue. I mean, maybe I was being overly simplistic to call that a B2C model, because Yammer wasn't exactly B2C, it was more maybe B2E. But those are the models that don't cross the chasm. That basically, if they're going to have any success, they have to start with so little friction that they don't have to overcome. So the first 2 stages of the technology adoption lifecycle are designed to overcome the fear of a disruptive technology and how it could be destructive. But the models you mentioned, if the Uber ride doesn't come, okay, well then we're not going to use Uber anymore. But you weren't afraid to try Uber. You weren't afraid to try Google. You weren't afraid to try Instagram or Pinterest. And if they were good,
they would catch on like a fad, like a consumer, like a good band, like a good music thing. So that whole hits model, I think, is a much better context for the B2C play than Crossing the Chasm. Crossing the Chasm is really for a B2B investment where you say, I am going to re-engineer some portion of my business to achieve a result I cannot achieve with conventional means, and I'm going to make an investment bet that this is going to pay off. But that requires federating the decision to a number of people. You've got to discuss it. Nobody discusses with their, oh, should I go on Pinterest? I don't know. What do you think? Okay, so,
Get a buyer group.
Yeah, exactly. Well, yeah. In fact, you said somebody's here that's got an education startup. Reminds us of one that I'm a venture partner at Wildcat Ventures, where Greenfig is ours. But you look at the healthcare situation with this compliance with meds, or trying to help people that are in Medicare in those situations, people that are underemployed or unemployed or underskilled or whatever, and you see a bunch of social problems where you could say, listen, this digital fabric, we can get to these people. It was never economical to reach them. It's homeless people have smartphones, okay? So we can reach these people. The question is, can we put together systems that can engineer social change or economic change on top of them, which is what you guys are trying to do. And so in that situation, the issue is, let's go back to the four things. You start with people who believe what you believe. Those are people who say, A, this is a worthy cause, and B, there is trapped value here, that if we do this right, we actually, the whole micro lending thing, there was real money you could actually make there if you did it right. So there's that possibility. I think the we believe what you believe, most of these things are successful for that because people are realizing, man, the social problem set's getting bigger and bigger and bigger. If we don't figure out a way to leverage this digital fabric, we're nuts and we're going to be in trouble. Crossing the chasm is harder. So now the issue is who has a business problem with, say, delinquent loans that says, I need you to solve that problem. And by the way, you may only have 60% of the solution, but that's not good enough. You'd have to say, for this class of lender, we're gonna get partners together because we can't do it all by ourselves, but we'll get a consortium of people together, and together we will take 100% of that problem off the table. That's the crossing the chasm moment. And my concern is that I don't see a lot of them crossing the chasm. So I think we're going to have a lot of very idealistic, socially altruistic, digitally sophisticated solutions that get a lot of excitement in the early market and don't cross the chasm. And that would be very bad for society. So I hope.
So we'll come back to crossing the chasm later if we want. I want to transition to Zone to the Wind.
I want a glass of the
Okay,
one. Okay,
great. Wet your whistle. So it's interesting, Zone to Win, you've talked a lot about these companies, Yahoo, Siebel, BlackBerry, MySpace. All of us probably know these companies, but it's interesting because you say they all have one thing in common.
Ouch. Or Nokia, Motorola. Yeah. They didn't catch the next wave. Yeah. They just didn't.
So it's interesting. So we talked a lot about this initial crossing the chasm. It's about getting across the first wave. But there's so many companies that never make it to the next wave. And that's really what your book is all about. So talk about what it means to catch the next wave.
So Scott, there's like 56 iconic companies listed on like page 8 of that book. I mean, and they're iconic because they crushed it the first time. They just crushed it. I mean, the best companies we've ever had, and they don't exist anymore. And so you think, how is that possible? Because these people really, so Prime, Wang, Data General, I mean, every company that ever was started in Boston. I'm sorry, but let's face it, a whole bunch that were started here as well. So what happens? What happens is you start your first company, you kind of incubate it, you go, so let's call that the incubation zone, and by crossing the chasm, you actually transform your company into something that's a real company now. It's probably only $10 million, but it's a real company, it has real customers, there's a real opportunity to go forward. You've kind of de-risked your existence. And then if you go from the transformation zone, we call it the performance zone, that's when you kind of scale. And if you got inside the tornado, you may scale incredibly there. And now you've gone from vertical to horizontal. I mean, this is really exciting stuff.
So incubation, transformation, performance. And then at that point, you got to become a real company with your productivity functions. So you need better finance, better systems, better legal, better HR, better. And we call that the productivity zone. So at the end of when a company's crushed it, they've kind of gone through those 4 zones, kind of a little bit in a linear sequence. They've kind of grown up through the zones. So now they say, okay, time to catch the next wave. Great, we got this. So they go to their incubation zone and they start making some pretty cool stuff. Now it isn't maybe quite as hot and sexy as the next startup, but it's pretty damn good. And so now they've got something great. Okay, now transformation. We got to take this business to scale because we want to use our sales force in the performance zone to sell it to everybody, service everybody. It's great. But it's not very good yet. This is actually, the product's kind of schnooky. We don't really have any partners quite yet. The demo's great. If you install it, it's a little iffy. By the way, nobody has any budget for it yet. We're all talking about it. My sales force wants to make quota. They look at this thing, they go, I don't think so. So my sales force actually kind of finesses my new product. By the way, the product needs a ton of investment. There's no, and by the way, this is where guys like, Jackson Square and Wildcat and various venture firms in the room, that's where we come in with a series A, B, C, D, and E. And by the way, if you stumbled, you may have to get recapped at series A or B or C or E or what, but you know what? It's there. Well, when you're inside a company, there's no venture capital. There's no place to turn. By the way, you're public, and if you're a public company, which most of these were at the time, your public investors are very clear. Don't do this. This is a bad idea. This is you're taking my dividend and you're putting it in. No, don't do that. So what happens is they would get into these things, they'd start to scale them, they'd get to a certain point where they realized, Mark taught me to call it a crisis of prioritization, Mark Benioff at Salesforce. You don't have enough money. And what the winning play is you have to take money out of your profitable core business and put it into your unprofitable scaling business. And at first you say, I'm courageous so I can do that. But then there's a time where it's like, oh, and by the way, the core business is going batshit because they're saying, I need that money. And the productivity zone says, we could use some of that money too. And so you see this pattern over and over again of coming up, starting a transformation, getting halfway through, pulling back, starting the next one, halfway through, pulling back. Because you can't tell your board we have no strategic plan. You always have a plan. You're always funding something new. And so it turns out to be that is the single most destructive thing you can do to a company, is get halfway into a transformation and stop. And about the 3rd or 4th time, you lose your company. And, and that takes about 10 years. Larry did something really, I think, I'm going to frame it slightly differently, but let me just do this. So it's 2001, and we have this mantra in Silicon Valley that innovation conquers all. And Larry said, not really. Actually, most of the companies here are dead men walking, and I'm going to acquire their install base, and I will do something called fusion. I'll pull them all together. Well, that was a rather decade-long head fake. He never pulled any of that together. What he did, and Computer Associates ran the same playbook 15 years earlier, which is you acquire install bases, and then frankly, you milk them. It's kind of a dairy business. But you do. And by the way, you become increasingly hated. So Computer Associates was the most hated company of its generation. Oracle, I think it stands above. I mean, and by the way, there's a lot of competition for that role, but I think they've peaked. But anyway, but the point was, because it was what's happened there, by the way, is that 4th group of customers says, well, I don't want to get the next thing, so just let me stay another year or another 2 years on this thing. So it turned out to be an incredible. Now, right now, that playbook is pretty tired, and I think they would like to have a slightly different playbook now.
Yeah.
But
it was it's interesting. I was reading when I was reading the Zone to Win originally, I ran across this quote that stopped me in my tracks. It said, "Conventional wisdom says established, franchises under threat of disruption are living on borrowed time. And that shouldn't be the case, because we all see companies that don't seem to have the next strategy, and they seem to be cycling. And your answer is no, the established companies have all the advantages. The problem is they don't have the right playbook. Hence why we're talking about Zone to Win, is that companies needed a playbook once they had the assets of actually making the first wave, catching the first wave, how to catch the next one. So let's talk about Zone to Win, the origination of this piece and why you wrote it and why you think it's so important. I as an operator, I feel like this book is going to be as important or more important.
Yeah, I mean, part of the reason is you look at the United States now, and we have gone through multiple generations of companies. We've consumed them, right? There was a generation of companies. This is why you could, if you read the first edition of Crossing the Chasm, it would be a complete, blank, and even the second one, whatever. Well, that means we've cycled through a portfolio of companies about every 15 years. Well, you know what? If we cycle through one more, the next set of companies, they won't be American companies, okay? So they just won't be. I mean, it's just, so if we can't afford, was my conclusion at any rate, we cannot afford as a society to cycle through our current leaders. So that kind of put the urgency in me in wanting to write the book. So you look at that and you say, well, so you're an established company. Let's just be clear. You have a balance sheet. You have a customer base that basically does not want to defect. Now, if you can't get onto the next wave, eventually they'll have to defect, but they don't want to defect. Okay? You have a partner base that is making its living with you. You have a worldwide service footprint, a worldwide sales footprint. You have everything that a startup wants, including your customers, right? And they're your customers, they're not the startup's customers. So you think, what the hell? Why does some little whatever get to beat my publicly held Fortune 500 company? And the answer is because that company is single-mindedly focused on one and only one outcome. If you give that startup another $1, they know exactly there's only one place to put it. If you work for a startup, you know my job is to get to the other side of that chasm or my equity is worthless. So everybody's doing this. In a big company, you have everybody rowing in a different direction. Sometimes they're actually trying to screw up the other guy in their own company. There's a lot of infighting, that kind of stuff. And so as a result, when a disruption comes, they can't bring the power of the company to bear on the disruption. So what was the playbook about? The first part of the playbook was to say, guys, first of all, we have to acknowledge we are conflicted. And we're not conflicted because we're jerks. We're conflicted because there are zones of interest in our company that are genuinely incompatible with each other. They can negotiate with each other, but they're fundamentally different in their charter. So the 4 zones I mentioned, the incubation zone, its charter is to invent new stuff. It's to be the startup zone inside the company. Okay, that requires its own governance model. Ideally, it would be a VC-oriented model, not with the capital. But if you see how VCs manage things, they manage things to milestones. They fund them to milestones. The general partner sponsors the deal. They meet with the person once a month. It's a very clear governance model. And the only thing that's interesting about that model is no corporation uses it ever.
And you got to be willing to fail.
Which is like dumber than dirt, okay? That is it is the most embarrassing thing about business today. The venture model has taken thousands and thousands of incubated businesses to scale, and no corporation uses it, period. Just drives me crazy. Well, the problem is, pardon? No, exactly. No, but here's the point. I don't want to create the economics. The economics, you're totally right. The venture economics is a completely different game. I just want to use the governance model. I just want them to be a board of people that decide which ones we invest in. I want it to be a board of people to decide, should we fund them to the next milestone? I want them to fund startup-like entities that have general managers with entrepreneurial leaders. I just want them to use the venture operating model, not the financial model, the operating model.
So anyway, that would be one zone, okay? The performance zone, that's where we all run our businesses. By the way, that's the zone that you organize your annual planning around. How much revenue we're going to have next year? How many salespeople do we need? How much product are we going to have? You know, what are we going to grow at? Blah blah blah. And then the productivity zones, all the cost center functions that you need to support the performance zone. So, you know, how much hiring, how much facilities, what kind of IT systems do we need, whatever. And in the annual budgeting process, you allocate resources across those three zones. Now, by the way, that's one other point. No venture capitalist ever funded a startup annually, right? Has anybody here got an annual budgeting thing with a venture capitalist? Listen, in the history of venture capital, I'm pretty sure nobody has ever done an annual, but every single corporation uses an annual budgeting process, which is totally not fit for purpose for the incubation zone, but it's absolutely fit for purpose for the performance zone and the productivity zone. Now, the productivity zone doesn't have to make a number. So they have their own governance model around efficiency and effectiveness and systems and programs. And the performance zone does have to make a number, and every quarter they got to make a number, and they're on the hook to do that. So you can kind of see how the performance zone has to have KPIs, quarterly businesses, performance-oriented compensation, you know, that whole model. That works for that zone. It doesn't work for the other three zones. Okay? A lot of guys in the performance zone say, we just need to give our HR people bonuses if they perform better. No, you don't. That's not their culture. That's not what they do. So each zone, but the productivity zone believe if you follow the process, good things will happen. Well, in the productivity zone, that's true, but it's not true in any of the other zones. You know, you don't follow the process to have a breakthrough innovation, and you don't follow the process to close a deal. You often cheat a little bit to close a deal, and then the process guys try to cover it up. So the point was, the point was, the first statement was just zone your business was, could we please acknowledge, and then the transformation zone is oh my God, we have to, you know, take all these resources from elsewhere and put it against the new thing, and then we have to hold everybody's feet to the fire until this thing gets to scale. By the way, the only people that have successfully done that historically are founders. So Jobs could do it, Ellison could do it, Gates could do it, Musk can do it, Bezos can do it, Reed Hastings can do it. You know, anybody who's a founder can just tell the company my way or the highway. But if you're a part of a management team that came in later, you don't have that. You don't have that power. And so what was happening with these firms was they'd try to negotiate a consensus of the willing. They'd get some number of people bought in. We believe what you believe, but a whole bunch of them went, yeah, I'll just take care of my patch. You worry about your patch. That won't work in the transformation zone. In the transformation zone, everybody has to row in the same direction. And that normally means the CEO has to fire between 1 and 4 really, really good executives. Because they just won't align. They just won't do it. And if you let them not align, that means their entire team doesn't have to align. And it just doesn't happen. So 4 governance models. Incubation zone, by the way, we don't need no stinking processes. So, you know, productivity zones stay out of our hair. And by the way, that's right. Because if you don't even have product market fit yet, what the hell do you need processes for? So you see how each zone they have a legitimate culture, they have a legitimate set of processes, you know, things that they care about. And they're very well understood. It's not magic. You can find people that know how to run each of those 4 zones. But during the annual budgeting process, they tend to blur, they tend to steal budget across lines. They do a lot of political stuff and horse trading, and they blur the distinction between the zones, and that creates this sort of very ineffectual, very slow-moving, you know, God, you're hard to do business with. Can't you ever make a decision? There are 100 people that can say no, and only, you know, you need 100 people to say yes, and only 1 person to say no. Everything that we hate about large corporations is coming from the fact that they're not maintaining zone discipline. So we ended up doing zoning at DocuSign. Yeah. You're leading the zoning at DocuSign.
And I'll talk about that maybe in a minute, but I think zone planning, we spent a whole day with our executive team just going through what you just talked about, understanding these zones. I think the big thing is understanding how to think about these strategic horizons for the business, right? So you think about the first wave of business. In DocuSign's case, it was e-signature. They crossed the chasm. Yeah. That is in our performance zone. That represents the big part of our revenue. But we also understood that e-signature was part of a bigger problem. They had to modernize what we refer to as a system of agreement. We just announced the Agreement Cloud. we had to go do a transformational acquisition of a company in the CLM space. We did that.
Contract
Lifecycle management, which we did, and then we're incubating new things because we know eventually we want to be the smart agreement cloud. So what you need to do for everybody in the audience is try to understand what is the strategic horizons of the business, and then you start mapping your investments to that. And you're not going to get to the horizon 3 of your strategy day one, but you need to start making bets today.
Yeah.
So why don't you share a few examples that they would understand, Salesforce, Microsoft, how did they catch the next wave? So when you look at those 4 boxes, where were the bets that they made in each one of those boxes that ultimately allowed them to not miss?
Yeah. So it's interesting. So the 2 case studies in Zone to Win are Mark Benioff in the Marketing Cloud and Satya Nadella in Azure. So maybe I'll start with those 2. So the difference between the 2 cases is Mark wanted to be a disruptor, and Satya was being a disruptee. And so it actually led to two different kinds of responses, but both required transformational initiatives. So at the time, in the Salesforce, Sales Cloud was in the performance zone, Service Cloud was in the performance zone, something called Force.com was in the performance zone. Mark had bought a company called Buddy Media, he bought a company called Radian 6. They were kind of a little bit kind of wandering in the incubation zone. They were not getting scale. He bought Exact Target, and he said, Exact Target, we're going to build this around Exact Target. And he put Exact Target in the transformation zone. Now, what that meant was, Mark did something called V2 Mom. Does anybody here know what the V2 Mom method is? You know, you should find out about it and learn it. It's really useful. But basically, it gets the entire company organized under one vision, one set of values, and one set of methods. And the number one method is the number one priority thing for the company. He put the Marketing Cloud is the number one method, even when he wanted to grow Sales Cloud at 25%, he wanted to grow Service Cloud. Marketing Cloud was going to lose money, but it was like, no, I know, but this is the most important thing. And so that was an example, and he used an acquisition. You don't always have to do this organically, although ideally I think you would start organically to learn about what you're trying to get into, and then at some point use acquisition to scale. Because if you're a $10 billion company, or at the time they were probably more like 5, but you can't create a $1 billion business organically in the time frame you need to. So you probably are going to use acquisition, but if you just acquire as your only response, you're probably going to be a dumb buyer. You're probably going to get like the 4th or 5th best company in the thing, and you have nobody inside your company who's bought into that category. So I think it's really important. Incubate inside the company with some of your best people, so that when you do the acquisition, that your team actually is the team that's going to take it into the performance zone. They have the relationship with your existing sales force and your existing people.
Geoffrey, on that one, it's interesting because I look at Salesforce, SFA was kind of their first thing.
Yeah.
Obviously against Siebel, contact management was kind of how they crossed the chasm.
Yeah.
Obviously do business model, no software. Then they got into service, and you're right, I think they went after Buddy Media as kind of a next horizon because they felt like social media was taking off. I think that was maybe a missed horizon where you realize, hey, God, we're the horizon we set, the strategic, probably the wrong one. It really should be CRM.
That's right. And that's the point about the incubation zone. You make mistakes in incubation. There was a year when I think Salesforce called itself the social enterprise. The social enterprise. Okay. Okay. Not every answer is correct on Jeopardy. So to give Mark and the team a lot of credit, they were able to make bets and then say, you know what, wrong bet, move on.
But I think this is important though, because if you don't figure out what your bigger vision is, you're probably going to be making investments in the wrong incubation zone. So I fundamentally believe if you can have more clarity on what your next strategic horizons are, you're going to place much better bets in the incubation zone. DocuSign's a great example. Once we knew that we were going to be the agreement cloud from e-signature, and that people were going to want our help preparing agreements, not just signing them, they're going to act and manage, we can make the right strategic bets in the incubation zone or transformational zone. And I felt like Salesforce missed there, but they quickly changed that and then readjusted their whole zone to win plan around.
Right. And to be fair, I think, if you have a theory, if it's wrong, the people that really lose in the incubation zone are the people that have envy. They end up investing in something because everybody else is.
and they're late to the party, and it's not very interesting. Now, the other case study I just want to say a few words about is Microsoft. So Microsoft, we don't need no stinking incubation zone. We run the world, right? I mean, we have Office, we have Windows, you know, we have all the back office software. We're the most powerful software company in the history of the industry. What's the bad part, right? And it wasn't until, you know, as we started getting into the back half of the first decade of the century that you realized this cloud thing, this could be for real. Well, if the cloud thing is for real, and you make data center software, that's not a very good position to be in. And Satya was running that group. He was running all the sort of the data center SQL Server and all the BizTalk servers and all that business server stuff. That's what Satya was running. So Satya realized that, you know, we have to do something about cloud. But to be fair, Ray Ozzie had come in from Lotus Notes as their CTO and had told them, this is what's happening. But Microsoft was smarter than Ray, so they sent Ray away. But Satya listened. So anyway, so he's realizing they're getting disrupted. Meanwhile, toward the back end of the decade, Windows starts getting disrupted because now all of a sudden the mobile starts displacing the PC. iOS is the new operating system on the mobile. Android's number 2. Anybody here have a Windows phone? Yeah. Okay. So they made a hell of a run at it, but they got 0. So basically, okay, now my operating system franchise is under attack. My back office software is under attack, and then Google comes with Google Apps and says, you know, that office software, kind of expensive, huh? Kind of clunky. Why don't we just give you some software, okay, called Google Apps? So all of a sudden, by the time you get to the first half part of this decade, Microsoft's 3 core franchises are under existential threat. That was a phrase they taught me, existential threat. So when you're under existential threat, your performance zone businesses are being attacked by disruptive, like if you're in retail, you're being Amazoned. That you're in that state. You have to transform those businesses in order to stay in business. And you can't let them stay in the performance zone, because in the performance zone, you got to make your number every quarter, no matter what. Well, you can't make your number and transform. So part of what, and Ballmer gets no credit for this, and it's really not fair. Ballmer supported Satya and Satya said in 2007, I'm not going to fund any more R&D that's not cloud-based. And there was they had a $9 billion on-premise software business at the time, right? And by the way, the net margins, not the gross margins, the net margins of those businesses were like, I don't know, 80%. It was like Sauternes grapes. I mean, they were just so sweet. The cloud business had negative gross margins, meaning as soon as you bought cloud services from Microsoft, they lost money, okay? And the thing is, the ask is, let's replace the on-premise business with the cloud business. What do you say, right? And by the way, to even more so, in 2011, when they really felt like we got to really make this happen, they double comped the sales force for selling the negative gross margin business to displace the so it's like, really? But the point is, they did get through it. They got through that knothole, and as you know right now, Azure is really, I think, the anchor engine of their stock price. Now, they then applied it. I got to know them shortly thereafter when Qi Lu was doing Office 365. Same problem. Office 365 on device, on premise versus in the cloud. Wanted to move everybody over. The third one was Windows. Windows didn't get there. There is no Windows business at Microsoft. By the way, there's no Windows division at Microsoft, which is, it's like saying there's no chip division at Intel, right? There's no microprocessor division. But that's the consequence of not doing that. And but they were able to do it, and they were able to do it because in both cases, the leadership of the company said, we are absolutely committed to this change. And by the way, about 4 major executives had to depart Microsoft within a relatively, like 2 or 3 years. I mean, these were like iconic executives, not fillers for seats, because they just wouldn't buy in. And it was like, okay, I got it, goodbye. And so that was but that was the playbook being run for Microsoft. Ideally, you wouldn't get that much at risk. So what would that look like? And what that looks like is being able to say, okay, we want to keep up with the next wave of disruptive innovation. Now, we're not going to lead it, so we're not the disruptor, but and it's not yet destroying us, so we're not in the Satya existential threat stage. We're in the stage of going, it's obvious sooner or later we have to accommodate this. And so one of the things you learn of that is you don't have to become better than the disruptor. The problem Nokia had was Nokia felt it had to leapfrog Apple. That was never going to happen. So they felt they had to differentiate over and above the differentiator. By far the more important thing for a mature company to do is to say, no, you don't have to outperform the disruptor. You have to neutralize the disruptor. Well, what does that mean? Well, that looks a lot more like Google Android. So Google Android is not better than iOS. And by the way, it copied a bunch of iOS, but it neutralized Apple. The way, by the way, that Windows neutralized the Macintosh. The way that the Internet Explorer neutralized Netscape Navigator. So all you have to do is get to good enough, fast enough. But it's a different problem. It's like you don't, so because no engineer woke up and said, you mean my job is to be mediocre? And the answer is yes, but quickly. So I think in the consumer business, that neutralization strategy and the consumer loyalty doesn't work as well for all the dynamics you said. In a B2B world, by the time you standardize on Workday or DocuSign or Salesforce or any of these companies, you get so many interdependencies. You just get to a point where you go, look, Marie and I have been married for 50 years, okay? When I was courting Marie, I had to differentiate. I mean, there were other people that wanted to marry her. I had to win the deal, okay? 50 years later, I have to neutralize. I just have to be good enough, fast enough. That's all I have to do. So I think that's sort of the game we're playing. But it's an important game to play.
True romantic.
True romantic. Yes. Yeah. Well, so I think in the crossing the chasm model, the tipping point is when you're crossing the chasm. So the people before the chasm are early adopters who fundamentally make decisions very individualistically. They don't consult other people, they do. But on the other side of the chasm, they make them collectively, and they're always. And so when you do that collective decision making, if I go, are you doing it? No. Okay, me neither, okay? The tipping point is when I go, you are, oh shit, me too. Okay, and it's like, I don't know if you ever played that game Othello, but like all the white things can all of a sudden turn to black things in just one move. It happens so fast, but until you're at the tipping point, prior to the tipping point, is like basically instead of getting the benefit of the doubt, you get the doubt of the benefit, right? And so you're always selling against the doubt of the benefit until the day that you get your one more customer, and now all of a sudden somebody calls you and says, I think I'm supposed to talk to you about something. And all of a sudden, you're now getting the benefit of the doubt. So in a B2B play, that's really critical. In the B2C play, I think it's that same. There's with the marketplace, it's can I get to enough scale that the reaction keeps it's network effects, it's reinforcing effects. And what was so hard about those marketplace models and whatever is you can get almost there, but as soon as you stop priming the pump, it stops. And so with all those plays, once you're in, really, you want to leave it all out in the field, because if you can get on the other side, it'll be self-funding. But prior to that, it's not. And by the way, nobody can, they say, well, so when is that going to be? If I know, I don't know, but until it happens, you got the doubt of the benefit.
So Geoffrey, you've written 2 amazing books, tons of research. So if you're going to write another book now, or if you're already writing a book that you haven't told us about, what would it be on?
I am writing another book. I won't tell you what the title is because I don't know what it is, but I will tell you that the subtitle is A Contemporary Take on Ethics and Metaphysics. I don't think it's a blockbuster myself. So I'm not going to write another business book. I'm an ex-English professor, ex-philosopher. I got a bunch of stuff I want to do that, like, there's 7 readers that want to read it, but I got to write it. So that's my next book.
Well, on behalf of everybody, thank you for everything you've done. You've helped a lot of us be more successful than we thought we could. So just appreciate everything you're doing and sharing your knowledge with all of us. So let's give another big round of applause. Geoffrey Moore.